Welcome to DIYeasycrafts and Berg.Knifemaking.com. Today we're going to take a look at how to make a knife with hollow ground bevels. Now this particular knife is made out of AEBL stainless. It's got custom burlap micarta scales and of course hollow ground bevels. Now, as many of you know, there's a ton of different steps involved in the knife making process. I'm going to run through the entire build, but kind of quickly. I'm going to focus mainly on the hollow ground bevels for this particular video. I profiled this particular knife on my 2x72. 2x72, I'm using a coarse grit belt, a 36 grit belt. Coarse grit belts move material a lot faster, generate less heat. I'm using a push stick just because it prevents my fingers from getting burned and prevents them from inadvertently slipping into the belt. By letting the belt hang off one side of the platen, I can actually even rough out the finger groove. To finish that finger groove, I'm using a small wheel attachment. Now my grinder is a Origin Blade Maker 2x72. It's got a 2 horsepower motor. At a variable speed. With the small wheel attachment, you definitely want to slow it down a bit. You don't want to burn out those bearings. After the blade is profiled, I hammer mark my maker's mark into the blade, and you do have a little bit of blowout on the back side. So before I start grinding bevels, I'm going to go over to another attachment. This is a surface grinding attachment that slides right into the 2x72. It attaches to an 1.5 inch tooling arm. This is also an Origin Blade Maker surface grinding attachment. I'm using a 120 grit belt, not taking off a lot of material, just really a few passes just to remove the blowout on the back side of that maker's mark. Now in order to do the hollow ground, or the hollow grinds, I use a 10-inch wheel, a large wheel attachment, and I'm using a tilt table. You can call this a tool rest or a bevel jig, whatever you want to call it. It's a great device that holds the angle of the bevel, so it really makes creating not only flat bevels but hollow ground bevels relatively easy. Now, I don't go through a sophisticated method of setting the angle. What I do is just set it up by eye, and then I use a centerline scribe to scribe a scrap piece of wood. That centerline scribe is set for the thickness of the material that I'm going to be using, the thickness of the knife. Then I'm going to grind a test bevel right into the wood. And if I want the bevel to be a little bit thicker, I'll make an adjustment to that tilt table. Just the tilt table. You can move it in, you can move it out, up, down, and of course the angle. And once you get that bevel on the wood to your liking, then you move over onto a blade. Now doing hollow grinds with the tilt table, as I mentioned before, is pretty straightforward and simple. You hold the blade flat onto the table, and then you move it up into contact with the large wheel. As you're doing this, you're going to pull from left to right or from right to left, depending on which side of the knife you're working. Now, since we're rough grinding the hollow grinds right now, pre-heat treating bevels, we're really just removing the majority of the material. You don't have to be real precise. You don't have to have a fluid pull from left to right. I am still using a coarse grit belt. This is a 60 grit. On these small knives, I don't really like to go more than about 60 grit on the rough grinds. If you went to a 36, you just have a harder time cleaning up the bevels post heat treating. You know, those deep scratch marks from the 36 can be a real pain in the neck to get out. Oh. With the 60, I'm getting the benefit of it removing material very quickly, not generating a tremendous amount of heat. And I actually use this time as practice. As I mentioned before, I'm really only rough grinding, but it's a really good opportunity to practice the techniques of, holding that blade nice and flat, pulling it smoothly from left to right, creating the arc to follow the curvature of the profile of the blade. When you get it all done now, the post-heat treating cleanup just becomes muscle memory. So once one side of the bevel is done, I'm going to move over onto the other. And then when I'm done with these rough grinds, I'll remove that tilt table attachment and I'll store that, but I won't change the angle on it. I'll wait until after these knives are heat treated, and then I'll go right back onto that same tilt table without adjusting it to finish them off or to clean them up. So these are the pre-heat treated hollow ground bevels. These knives, stainless steel knives, get heat treated in a heat treating oven wrapped in tool wrap. They go through a sub-zero quench and tempering. When that's all done, you have to clean up not only the surface of the blade, but also the bevels from the heat treating slag. So what I do, I go back onto that surface grinding attachment. I'm using a 120 grit belt. You could certainly use a 240 or a 400, whatever the surface finish is that you desire. And I'm just removing enough material to clean up the blade. I don't want to damage my maker's mark. I don't want to remove too much. Once both sides are surface ground, I'll go back onto that 2x72 grinder. Large wheel is put back in place, as is the tilt table. This time, instead of using a 60 grit belt, I'm going to go back with a 120. And this time I want to keep a real good eye on creating not only even bevels on both sides, but also aligning the plunge mark, or the plunge line on both sides. And that's pretty easy with this system. You can just visually line up the plunge line from one side with the plunge line from the other. Now, I did a few of these knives at the same time. If you want to get rid of all those grind lines, you can move to finer grit belts. Go right through 240, 400, 800, 1,000, up to 2,000, and really get rid of the majority of those grind lines. And then a little hand sanding, and you can go right to a mirror finish if you want. To finish off the knife, this particular knife has removable scales. They're burlap micarta. I covered making that burlap micarta on a separate video, and I will put a link up on this one. But I finished profiling the knife with the scales in place. That way the knife profile and the scales profile match perfectly. I put back on the small wheel attachment on the Origin Blade Maker 2x72 to finish off the finger groove, to polish that finger groove. I usually do that with a 120 and also a 400 grit. I round and start to shape the scales right on the 2x72. You really find that this is the workhorse of most knife making shops. You do the majority of the work on the 2x72. I do use a little hand sander to round over the inner edge and the inside of the handles, and also just give it a light sanding. This is a 220 grit paper. Then I'll do some hand sanding, and then I'll go to polishing. Now, I actually do some of the polishing right on the 2x72 using a felt belt and polishing compound. And to my liking, I find that it polishes just a little bit faster than the buffing wheel, especially larger flat surfaces. And then you just go to the buffing wheel and polish what you were not able to polish on the flat platen of the 2x72. So at this point, I'm going to reattach the scales. I've cleaned them all up, cleaned out all of the polishing compound out of each one of the screw holes. And these just get bolted from both sides. There's a threaded insert in the middle, and then I'm using 832 black cap screws that are 1/4 inch long from each side to bolt everything together. This is basically the finished blade. I still have to sharpen it, but you can see the profile, you can see the handles, everything matches up. It's going to be a decent looking knife. The sharpening, again, I go back to the 2x72, and I'll start that micro bevel with 120 grit paper, and I'll grind each side at about 20 degrees until I create a burr along the entire length of the edge. Then I will change, or I'll do both sides that way. Then I'll change belts. So I'll go from 120 to 400. Then I'll recreate that micro bevel and burr along the whole edge on both sides. Then I'll go to an 800, 1200, and then a 2000. So it doesn't take a lot of time. It probably takes more time just to do the belt changes than it does to actually do the micro bevel. Each belt change, I'm also slowing down the grinder a little bit. So I did the initial bevels probably at 60%, and I end up doing most of the polishing at about 20%. The final step is on a leather stroping belt. Some people use this in motion. I don't. I just use the 2x72 to kind of hold it against the flat platen. And I'll make a couple of passes on each side just to polish that micro bevel and to get rid of whatever tiny little burr is left. When you're finished, the knife should be scalpel sharp. That's if of course you did it correctly. So this is the finished knife. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I ask that you please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and if you can, please make a comment in the comment section on the YouTube video. I'd like to invite you to join us on our Facebook group, Knives and Knife Making. By all means, check out my other knives, which are available on www.bergknifemaking.com. And if you're interested in knife making, check out the book that Jason Northgard and I put out last year called Introduction to Knife Making, and that's available on Amazon.com. Thank you very much.